Welcome to Board Game Binge, the place where we bring you bite sized, bingeable board game content from across the industry. I'm your host, James Staley, and in this episode, we're chatting with Keith from Thunderworks Games. His latest game, Emerald Skulls, the fast and tricky goblin dice game, is currently on Kickstarter. Keith, welcome to the binge. How you doing, sir?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it is amazing to have you. I saw this game when I was flicking through Kickstarter, and I was like, "Oh boy! Not only do I love dice games, but this I love gambling. I love dice. I love goblins. Man, it just sucked me in. So I reached out to you, and you're so kind to respond back and get come on the podcast. Man, we got a lot to go through in the next 30 minutes. You've done a lot of campaigns. First, let's start off where did this all begin? So you've done 16 campaigns that I know of. Maybe there's been more you've been involved with. But when did this all start?
Yeah, so this started, I don't know, 2012 or so.
Oh wow.
And I worked in the video game industry for 15 years. And I was working at a video game developer called Raven Software at the
Mm.
time. And I just played, I was playing lots of board games, that was kind of my main hobby. And I played with some buddies over a lunch hour every day, and we just decided like, hey, we make video games all day long. These board games don't seem that complicated, so let's try our hand at that. And Kickstarter was kind of brand new.
Yeah.
Things like the Glory to Rome Kickstarter campaign was like the big thing at the time, and I was like a pretty early adopter of Kickstarter. And the guys like Jamie Stegmeyer and James Matthew at the time were doing kind of tell-all blogs,
Yeah.
kind of like telling you how to do all this stuff. And in my ignorance, I was like, that doesn't seem so hard. Um, and so we started just kind of working on our own games. And then basically out of cowardice or I was too nervous to try to find a publisher for my games, and I was like, well, I'll just do it myself. And that's kind of where it started. My first game that I put on Kickstarter was in 2014 called Bullfrogs. It was my own design. And obviously had a lot of support and from friends and family, and learned a heck of a lot of stuff. And then after that project was over, then it was like, well, what's next? And eventually kind of found the idea for the dice game role player,
Mm.
and did that on Kickstarter, was successful. And this is all doing this on the side, right? I was still working at Raven, full time. And
Was
this
it
was just,
something where, like, because I've talked to other people who've been part of the video game industry that
yeah.
have moved into the board game industry, and it's almost this natural progression. And what a lot of them have told me, literally almost every one of them, is that dealing all day in the electronic side, while fun and awesome, in every full-time job you have, there's always this tendency to want to do something that's kind of the opposite of it, or something a little bit different, as kind of a reprieve from that day. So where you're very much on screen, board games is more tactile, and it's
Yeah.
kind of like, but there's some adjacencies in terms of like story elements and game design and so forth. Development cycles aren't as long as they are in the video game industry.
That's
Is
true.
that
Yeah.
kind of your experience too, or?
Definitely some of that. So some of it was coming out of just the social element of playing board games, that I wasn't getting playing video games, and some of it is like, whenever I kind of, this has happened multiple times in my life where it's like I love something, have a huge passion for it, then I turn that into my job, and then kind of that passion goes away, right? So
Yeah.
like I went to school for music, and I worked in a recording studio, and I loved playing in music, playing in bands and music, and that kind of went away. And then I was like, well, I love video games, and then I did that for 15 years, and some of the magic starts to fade away. And then I find my new passion, and that was board games.
Yeah.
But there is definitely a lot of crossover. Like in the office at the video game developer, there's people that have stacks of board games on their
Mm.
their their desks. Like there's just a love for gaming in general. There is a huge difference not only on the timelines, like you mentioned, of like, this video game is it's gonna, a 3 year long project, and I have worked on 3 year long projects in board games, but most of the time they're much shorter than that.
Yeah.
But the thing that I like the most is that, okay, at Raven, I'm working on the latest Call of Duty game, and we've got 800, 1,000 people working on this thing, and you're just one gear in this massive machine. Whereas if I'm publishing my own board games, it's like everything stops with me, right? I'm making all the decisions. So all the successes are mine, but all the failures are also mine. So there's something kind of attractive to that, at least for me, of like having a lot of ownership and really being invested and following, this is my dream. It's not like our, 800 people's dream that some large publisher is making like lots of decisions for us. So
Yeah.
there's definitely kind of a smaller scale of it, which I think is more attractive as well.
Was there ever a thought to just design and work with another publisher, or was it always no? I'm gonna be the guy that takes this to the market.
It's I've always been the guy, right?
Yeah.
So, and my background in video games was I was a producer, so like project management. So that's like
Yeah.
kind of where my bread and butter is,
Yeah. It's a
and like
wheelhouse.
the
Yeah.
fact that I had designed a couple things that people seemed to like was kind of almost secondary. So I was the idea of just kind of controlling it. I want to make all the art direction decisions. I want to kind of be in control of all those things. But on the other hand, I have designed games for other publishers. So Eduardo Baraf from Pencil First Games, which I know you've talked to him.
Yeah.
I designed a few games for him as well. So if there's an opportunity to work on some design stuff that's outside of my own company, I'm not shy to do those things. But at the end of the day, I kind of like the production process in
Yeah.
addition to designing these things.
Certainly, I tell people like in this industry, if you like, well, either if you do or don't like business, you're gonna get into business.
Yeah, yeah,
Right.
100%.
So people that like I like business, so I find that part I kind of geek out over that part, right? But for those who get into board game design with the thought of they're going to put a game out there, it's a bit of a learning curve, right? Because you're switching from designer into literally entrepreneur and having to
Right.
understand that entire process from start to end. If you're not just pitching to another publisher, what were the games you did for Pencil First?
I designed a bunch of their solo modes
Okay.
for Herbaceous and
Oh no
Floriferous and
way! Oh, I love those games.
Sunset Over Water and
Yeah.
a few other ones that I can't remember. And then in terms of core design, I designed Skull Hollow and Maul Peak, and then there's some future projects that those guys are working on that I also had a hand in. So yeah,
Wow, you're like everywhere. Where do you find the time? Like,
I don't sleep a whole lot. I have to be honest, but yeah.
yeah, I was gonna say like when you get up to like 16 campaigns, right? Like it's a. I mean, obviously it's over a number of years, but you've got the
Right,
machines running, right? The machine's constantly chugging ahead here.
right,
Time management becomes a big part of that, where
100%.
you're especially if the plan is you constantly have either a game or two games come out a year. You are in post kind of Kickstarter mode on one game. You're in Kickstarter mode on another one. You're on pre-Kickstarter mode on another one. You're
Right,
in development on another one, and then even earlier in that, you're seeding. Either you're designing your own, or you're taking submissions and you're reviewing submissions. Right, like it is a lot
right.
of stuff to do to kind of keep that engine constantly churning things out, and then to hear that you're designing on the side, like gosh,
Yeah. And there's a fair amount of effort that goes into like going to conventions. We do
yeah,
four consumer conventions every year, and I mean, I couldn't do for a long time. It was just me in after hours doing this stuff,
yeah,
and then once kind of the Kickstarter for the first expansion for Role Player kind of did really well, then I was able to step away and do Thunderworks full time. But for a long time, it was just me, and then now I've got some really great people that we brought into the company. We're
sure,
at 5 employees now, so
wow,
me, and then we've got a sales and like a sales and convention planning person,
mm,
and then we have a marketing person, and we have a graphic designer, and we have a finance and operations guy. So um, as a result of kind of bringing these people on slowly over time, I've been able to kind of give some of the things that I don't like to do as much or things that I'm not very good at and give them to people that they can really focus and do those things well, and then I can really kind of focus on the things that either I like to do or I like to think I do well.
yeah,
So those are those people that being there, I wouldn't be able to do 2 to 3 games a year if I didn't kind of have the help from all these other folks. But what's interesting is that especially when it was just me, I'm wearing all these hats, and that was definitely um, challenging, and lots of mistakes were made. There's lots of lessons being learned, and I was able to weather the storm and continue to make games. So it's been an interesting journey.
But even with that, now that kind of is kind of that chicken and egg thing where okay, now that you've got staff, now you
Yeah,
have to keep pumping out
yeah,
games, right, in order to keep
right.
those
It's
people
not just
fed. So
right. I'm not just putting food on my table. I got to like these other people and their families are reliant on
yeah,
me making sure we're signing great games and that these things look great and all these other pieces have to fit together and do and have a successful product so that we can keep doing this and everybody continues to get paid. So there's a different stress there, right? So
yeah,
there's not the challenges like you said, entrepreneurs like learning how to run a business kind of becomes the challenge. Instead, whereas at the beginning it was like figuring out how to design a great game and run a Kickstarter, and then it transitions to like how do you run a company well? How do you take care of your employees well? How do you make sure that everybody is on the same page and communication is going well? So definitely the responsibilities and the stressors have changed over time. It's kind of nice to see it evolve and obviously I've never started a business before and
yeah.
I've learned many things. Um, and it's interesting to look back and like see all these either decisions that I kind of accidentally made the right decision, which happens sometimes, or mistakes, and then you look back and you say, the solution was so clear, and I couldn't see it at the time because I've never done this before. So it's always it's been a cool journey, and it's fun to see kind of collaborate with other people that are also going on that same journey and
Yeah.
kind of exchange ideas, which is also
At
fun.
different phases too, right? In that
100%.
journey. So I mean, and I think that's what's really cool about this community. I mean, post podcast, I would think nothing to shoot you an email if I had a question, and likewise, I'm sure same thing on your end. If you saw
Right.
something I was doing, you're like, oh wait, I'm gonna send Jay a quick note and just get his thoughts on that. Like it's a very sharing community, which I think is great. Like most publishers
Right.
are more than happy to kind of help each other out with that journey, and hopefully, if you can learn from others' mistakes along the way. Like I've made a ton right along the way, and I try to pass those on where I can. If I'm talking to somebody, I say, hey, I did this, this, and this.
Right.
These are little things you might want to, little hazards you might want to watch out for. I mean, Amazon is a great example of this, right? And if I try to do that with other people too, is listen as much as I can into what were some of the hazards they had, and how can I prevent that myself, so I don't have to go through
Right.
that same painful learning, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
What percentage of your games now are kind of designed internally versus signed publishers? Is it almost entirely signed publishers or signed designers now, or
No, the target was like a 50-50 split,
yeah,
but it's probably slid more to like 30, maybe 30% are my designs and then 70% from other designers. I go to a lot of proto spiels and I'm pretty involved in the local community. So
yeah,
um, a lot of the designs that I sign, like I'm either part of the development process
mm,
because I'm just playtesting other people's games a lot. That I end up saying, oh, this is in a pretty good spot. I should pick this up. But so like I'm out of Madison, Wisconsin, so there's quite a few designers
yeah,
here that I've signed, including the designer of Emerald Skulls, or in Milwaukee, which is just a short couple hour and a half away. So, but I do take submissions. It's always a tough one because when people send me a submission, like I got to be really excited about it because that means that if I'm working on this person's game to do development or kind of finish it up, then I'm not working on my own designs.
yeah,
It's got to be like somebody shows me a game that I'm like more excited about it than my own baby, basically.
yeah.
So which happens sometimes. But I think in general, I'll continue to design stuff. But I mean, I know a lot of designers, they'll have like 10 games that they're working on all at the same time. And
Yeah.
I'm usually like I work on one game at a time. And then I just keep banging my head against the wall until I love it. Or I just jettison it forever. It's very rare that I'm kind of working on multiple games at the same time.
Do you
So
ever go back to the scrap pile and kind of like inject new life into one of these corpses of a design idea?
yeah, for sure. There's a couple that I'm trying to kind of inject some life into, but um, because it's something that I worked on 5 years ago, and then
Yeah.
I have 5 years more of experience, and the market is a lot different than it was back then. So sometimes it's worth going back to and looking at. But in general, most of the time, like when it's gone, I just erase it from my memory and move on to something else.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah.
You're a stronger
Um,
man than I have these little ghosts of the past that I keep going back to, saying, "Well, maybe there's a nugget there. There's something. Maybe if I rework it, I can get it back out."
so, sometimes I think, well, what if I just took this game and I give it to somebody else and I say,
Yeah.
hey, see what you can do with this and see what happens. But in general, there's more than enough going on, and there's more than enough kind of new ideas that I'm excited about.
Yeah.
That it's rare that I kind of go back to something that I worked on previously that didn't make it to the light of day.
That's a challenge of some
More,
designers I've talked to where they say like they have so many ideas, right? There's like this kind of tsunami of ideas come from different areas that it can sometimes be difficult to focus, right?
right?
Where it's like, okay, I got this idea, but I want to work on this, I want to work on this. And sometimes you can get into this kind of paralysis where nothing. And if you go to these proto events, I'm sure you've seen it too, where you're seeing the same people there working on the same game from like 5 years ago when you were there, and
Mm-hmm.
it's like, whoa, like but they just got so much going on, they can't kind of. It's never going to be done. The design is never done, right? So at some
Right.
point, you just got to kind of call it, right? Put a stick in the sand, and say, okay, we're gonna call it. We're this is the the point where we're gonna stop and start working towards the development side now to see if we can commercialize this, right?
Right. I think some of my experience working in video games, and I worked with a lot of artists because artists are the same way. Like, it's never done. It's done when the producer says you're done. You have other things you need to work on, and some of that kind of discipline, I think, comes from that experience of like
Yeah,
just understanding that these creative efforts are never truly done. They just people stop working on them, and sometimes especially in this is a business where we got to bring these things out into the world for them to enjoy.
yeah,
Um, you got to call it sometime, and sometimes it's tricky to figure out when that is. Like when is a game done? And that's a difficult question to answer. I mean, and my answer to that is always like, I trust my gut, and then when the feedback coming through from playtesters or whatever just boils down to like little like graphic design,
yeah,
little things, illustration things or whatever, then I'm like, okay, the worst thing somebody could come up with on this game is like the smallest little thing. So I think the game's done.
yeah. Or the desire to add complexity for the sake of complexity, right? Like I've seen so many times as a core game idea where I'm like, okay, that's great. And then there's all these offshoots going these different directions from people giving their feedback. It's like, whoa, 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 whoa. Let's get this core idea polished first, and
Yeah.
then we can incrementally build on that if necessary. But there's nothing wrong with having a slick, tight game, right?
Yep. I mean, and some of that just comes from like playing lots of games and
Yeah,
like having other, I look to Reiner Knizia's designs as a great example of like, low complexity rules, really interesting gameplay,
yeah,
and like that's kind of how I like to like that's how I like my games, and that's what I look for from other people's games as well. I think um, complexity is an interesting topic because there's actually been times when I've asked designers or I've looked at my own designs and say, actually, uh, we need to kind of ratchet up the complexity a little bit on this, or we
mm,
need to tack on some stuff. Um, and usually that conversation comes out of putting on my producer or my publisher hat and saying, what are the components of this game? How much is it going to cost to make this thing? What does the MSRP have to be? Does the game in the box fit the MSRP? So for example, when I was originally working on Role Player, 2015 or something, the game was simpler, and but the game had 73 dice in the box,
mm.
and the MSRP was going to have to be $60. And I was like, people aren't going to buy a 20-minute game for $60. It's just people just they want to see. It's just a disconnect for consumers, right?
Yeah,
Um, I mean, I think we were talking previously about kind of how the deluxification of some of these Kickstarter games has kind of gone through the roof,
yeah,
and I think that kind of flies into this conversation as well. But for that particular game, I actually added additional layers of complexity so that the decision making was kind of more strategic and more intense, I would say, so that it felt like a game that somebody was comfortable spending $60 on.
Yeah.
Um, so it's a balance. Usually, when you play somebody's prototype, it's always like, it's very, very common to be like, okay, we need to cut a third of this stuff. There's just too much stuff going on. Let's focus the experience and really polish that. But sometimes the opposite can happen as well. Of like you have something that's really, really polished, but the manufacturing of it is gonna the manufact. Wait a second. So sometimes the manufacturing of it dictates like a need
Mm.
to actually add some of that complexity back in so that
Yeah.
the gameplay experience matches the MSRP.
Well, the other part of that is even the push to um, be able to afford the marketing in the Kickstarter campaign, right? And some of the numbers I've seen out there is you're looking at $16, $17 per backer. By the time they go from that entire, the times you hit them and through meta ads or whatever, by the time they finally back, that cost is $16, $17. If you have a game that's selling for $20, it's tough to kind of justify that kind of marketing spend. I think that is probably why we're seeing some of this movement upwards in terms of MSRPs, and as we said, deluxification is to try to justify. So it's almost like this kind of one thing is driving the other, but the root behind I think some of that is just trying to be able to get the dollars to be able to get to the next level in terms of funding.
Yeah, there's definitely the math equation of MSRP versus like the cost to acquire a new customer, and then like just building awareness for the product.
Yeah,
It's complicated, you see smaller games are harder to market because there isn't as much budget to market them. So
yeah,
acquiring those customers, if your profit margin is $5 and it costs you $7 to acquire the customer, then you probably, obviously you're at a loss there.
yeah.
So, and then there's kind of a hope that once you acquire one customer, that customer can kind of create more customers by playing that game with their friends because it's an amazing game, and them, purchasing that title as well, distributing the cost of that, acquiring that customer across multiple
Or even
copies.
coming back for another campaign, right? So
Sure.
following you
I mean,
now as a
there's
publisher
value
and
in
so
that
forth.
for sure.
Yeah. Where did Emerald Skulls? How did you land on Emerald Skulls? Like, where did you find it? How did you kind of connect with the designer on this, and like, how did that kind of manifest?
Yeah, so it's an interesting, it's a little unusual. So Emerald Skulls is based on an idea from from some of our other titles. So we have this world called World of Ulos that has a bunch of fantasy games in it. One of them is called Role Player Adventures, in which it's like a narrative adventure. And in one of those adventures, in that game, the players encounter inmates at a fantasy prison called Colbeck Prison playing two gambling games.
Hmm.
They're just kind of throwaway lines in the narrative of the text. One is called Goblin Vaults, which is a card game, and one was called Emerald Skulls, which was a dice game. So then it just popped into my head. It's like, oh, it would be cool to like make a game from the game. And I was looking for some smaller projects to do because I had done these big 3 year long massive game development cycles, and so I was like, let's do something smaller because like I need a break. And so we did Goblin Vaults as a card game. And then I was kind of looking for whatever the Emerald Skulls game was going to be. So I knew it was a dice game. I knew it was supposed to be like a gambling game that prisoners or fantasy prison might play. So I had kind of that kind of really restricted canvas of what I was looking for, and I mentioned it to a local designer, and we met up, Stephen Dast, and we met up because I always do playtesting at our local game store every Thursday at noon.
Yeah.
And he just came and said, "Hey, I got that game," and he sat down and we played it, and like everybody, it was just such a strange experience because it was a gambling game, and I'm like not very well versed in gambling games. Like that's just like a genre that I don't play a lot of.
Yeah.
So like I had never played Ready Set Bet, and like there's all these other kind of traditional card games that I just don't have that much experience with. And we sat down and played this dice game, and everybody at the table was like having like a hoot and hollering good time, and like more of a like pure joy response playing a board or dice or card game that I'd seen in a long time. And I was like, there's something special here, right? So like, um, so he had really the bones, the really strong bones for a game, and I was like, this is cool. Let's work on it. And we continue. I ended up signing the game, and we worked on it for another 6 to 9 months, and here it is. So on Kickstarter, it's great because it plays a high player count.
Mm.
Out of the box, it plays up to six. We've got a 7 and 8 player expansion that you can get as well, and everybody's involved in everybody's turn because one person's rolling the dice and everybody else is betting on the outcome, and everybody's going to get paid out based on either how the dice roll or how the dice are placed.
Yeah.
Um, and I actually think personally, I like betting more than I do the rolling part. So like when it's my turn to roll, I'm like, okay, I guess I can do that. That's cool. I really like the betting part because there's like a little bit of in general, I don't really like speed games, but this has a speed element. So like you can only bet when the tumbler, which was rolling the dice, has the dice in their hands.
Yeah.
So as soon as they pick up the dice, like people quick put their bets down because the people who bet there first are going to get a better payout. So there's kind of that part is fun, and then it's also this. So once people start betting on something, then they kind of become this like temporary team where they're like they really want the person the rolling dice to do that thing. So there's like chanting going on and stuff. It's fun.
I had one reviewer that I was watching was kind of likened it to like crap. It's almost like craps, I guess, right? The game
Yeah,
of craps, right?
yeah,
Where you're betting on the person rolling the dice, and you're kind of betting on
right.
what their outcome is. So you're rooting for them, right?
Right. You're rooting for them for certain things. And then the roller, they can see where people have bet and they might like change how they're going to place the dice to minimize the benefit that the betting people got.
Yeah,
So it's like kind of an interaction with the crowd from the person who's rolling the dice too. So I do think it's a really cool special game and it plays a high number of players and it's got some meat to it. Yeah, there's a lot of luck, but it's like how many games do you have that plays 6, 7, 8 players that like is engaging for all players all the time?
I love it.
Um,
I was
it's pretty
playing
rare.
Zombie Dice the other day with the family,
Oh yeah,
and
zombie dice.
it's a great game, but it's one of those ones where you have you're waiting till it comes around to your turn, right?
Right,
Where what
right,
this is you're constantly playing, like you're playing throughout. Like if you're not rolling, you're betting, right?
right.
Which I think is
Yeah.
cool. The artwork, that image on that box just sucks you right in. I'm showing it on screen here. It's awesome. I love it. The dice look super cool. And these
Mm.
little custom dice with the skulls on them. And I think you're right. There's this kind of movement towards higher player counts. I know certainly when I go to game nights, often we'll have a table of 6, 7 people. I was like, oof, is there any games out there that we can play? And there's not a lot, right? That people have
Right.
in
I
their
mean, the
game bags.
defaults are usually like 7 wonders.
Yeah,
I mean, if you want something that has some meat to it, there aren't that many games that hit that piece. It's and so I think it has it kind of fills a unique spot. I mean, for me, for game nights, if there's 6 people, we're in general we're playing 2, 3 player games.
yeah.
But I know there's a lot of groups that don't like splitting up like that. And games like this fill that need.
Yeah, the metal coins look super awesome. You've got this add-on here with these metal coins that are like shaped like gears. I
Hmm.
mean, I see one of the modes. There's also like a roll-up mat that fits in the box, right? Like I'm one of those people that I refuse to play with game mats unless it fits in the actual box. You've got one that fits in the box, which I think is awesome. The trays, like there's like people that like deluxe. You've gone like deluxe vacation, right? There's
Yeah.
there's a deluxe version here, which is super awesome. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention also that you've hit $120,000. I'm putting this in Canadian dollars. It's the only way I can see it. On a goal of 34,000, which I think is awesome. Congrats on that. Over
Mhm.
1,575 backers. You still got 2 days to go. For those who do want to check this campaign out, I am going to put a link in the show notes so they can easily find it. Of course, you can just type in Emerald Skulls on Kickstarter and come to the page, but it's definitely worth checking out. What comes after? Like you're obviously cranking out games like crazy. Like can you
Yeah.
tease us what the next one is or?
Yeah, so the next one on the docket is an October 1 Kickstarter
Oh wow.
for a game called Citizens of the Spark, and that is from designer Philip Duberry, who's done quite a few games. His most notable, or maybe the most recognizable, is Black Orchestra, which is a cooperative game.
Hmm.
But Citizens of the Spark is a 1 to 5 player competitive game. It has this kind of wide variety of different kind of animal citizens. The setup kind of feels a little bit like Dominion, where you kind of pick a certain number of these guys that you're going to play with, and you shuffle them together, and then you're drafting cards, you're
Yeah.
laying them in place, and then the more of a copy of a card that you have, when you activate them, they have a more powerful ability, But then once you do that, everyone around the table who also has that citizen can activate theirs as well. And it's really cool because there's 30 different citizens in the box, and you play with 7 to 10 of them, and they all interact differently. So there's like a lot of replayability and exploring how the different characters interact with each other. And you can have like a more aggressive setup where there's more take that, or you can have like a super peaceful version of it, or somewhere in between. So it's really exciting, and definitely check it out on BoardGameGeek.com or wherever.
How do people fall, like if somebody wants to kind of follow along, kind of seeing like what the next game is coming, like is there like a page they can go, like a social page or something they can follow you on?
For sure. I mean, going to www.thunderworksgames.com and signing up for the newsletter, that's always a good place to kind of get the latest and greatest.
Yep.
But we're very active on Facebook, searching for Thunderworks Games. And we do a little bit on Instagram and the old X/Twitter. But those are the main places to interact. And then we're very active on BoardGameGeek.com, and we've got 2 groups on Facebook. One is dedicated only to our fantasy stuff, which is the World of Ulos. So if you look for the World of Ulos, Facebook page, you can find that. And then we've got our Thunderworks page as well.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, Keith, I want to wish you all the best on this campaign. I know you guys are going to be happy with where this lands. We're just entering the back end hockey stick now, that last 48 hours. So the ticker just keeps going like crazy. And I think it's worth people checking out, especially if you like dice chucking games. It looks like a lot of fun. All this best this coming year, and I can't wait to see the next campaign, my friend.
Awesome. Thank you.
Take care. Cheers. This has been an episode of the Board Game Binge podcast, hosted by James Staley, produced by James Staley and Mike Bruner, with original music by Nick Smith. If you would like to watch these interviews live, simply subscribe to our YouTube channel, Board Game Binge, and you'll get access to live interviews, giveaways, and interesting board game content from across the industry. I can't wait for you to join us. See you next time.